Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lodgge podcast, episode 8, our big season finale. Joining me today is Adam and Agusia from Adjective Noun Studios. How are you both doing today?
Good, doing great. It's a nice sunny day outside.
Agusia, how are you
Yeah,
doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm enjoying the weather.
Nice, nice. So Adjective Noun is a wonderfully talented studio, and they're CGA nominated this year. They're independent and specializing in mobile titles with no ads, no microtransactions, and no other funny business. Just games, just like that. So today we're going to talk about the studio's origins. We're going to talk a little bit about their newest title, and there's going to be a whole lot more than that. So everybody stay tuned. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. So this season we've been leading off with a special question that I've actually really enjoyed asking everybody, and I want to ask both of you. What are your ideal gaming situations? We're all so busy all the time, both of you with like a studio and full-time jobs and all these other things going on. When you're ready to sit down and finally play something, what do you prefer? Night, day? Do you prefer, like, what's your ideal situation? Adam, why don't we start with you?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's not like I used to be where I could just like play video games wherever. Kind of have to like sprinkle them throughout the day, but ideally it's just kind of like maybe like just after lunch in the morning, you know, you've done stuff in the morning and you just have like the rest of the day with nothing else planned. You can just like dive into a game for like a couple hours, more than a couple hours, like 5 or 6 hours, and a nice decent gaming chunk.
Nice. What about you, Agusia?
So like I go on and off with when I actually play video games and when I don't. Like when I was super busy working multiple jobs at once, I would never have the time to play video games or the energy. But now that I'm only working for Adjective Noun, it's been mostly like after work it's nice to play for a couple of hours. I play audio surf, which is you play a song and you're done type of game.
Nice.
And then like if I want to play like a narrative heavy game or like a longer game, I like playing something that I can actually get a good chunk progress in. I play a lot of random indie titles, so if like I check how long to beat, and I'm like, if this is a 5 hour game, I'll play it for like 2 hours and then like play another like 3 hours the next day and to get it actually done.
I'm very similar to that. I was one thing that like I never actually used How Long to Beat until I got into the games industry, because at that point it's when I was too busy to play all the games I wanted to play, which I think is ironic for everyone I've talked to in the industry, that it's like that's actually the time where you play the least amount is once you're actually in the biz itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm the same way. I'm very, very lucky with that. I'm much more of a night person. I like not having, like, no one can get a hold of me. The world's kind of gone to sleep and you can kind of zone out. But it's a little bit hard nowadays when, you know what I mean, working those full-time hours, there's not a whole lot you can do. You want to stay up till 2 in the morning, it's not going to happen anymore.
Yep.
So I wanted to ask both of you right off the start of just some of the brief origins for the studio. So you both met at Brock University, I assume?
Yep.
And then what made you decide to open up a studio together?
So we were like on the bus, and I think I was playing like Bloons Tower Defense 5, or maybe it was 6. I forget which one. But it had recently been updated where they changed like how things leveled up and how you like gained progression, so that it was like way more heavily geared towards like spending the premium currency on stuff.
Yep.
And then I'm like, I don't want to play this game anymore. And we had kind of been talking about like what we were going to do like after university and stuff. And they're like, what if we just made a studio that made mobile games that were just games? And we're like, that's pretty neat. And then after that, we sort of like, we're like, is this something that we actually want to do? And started looking into the logistics of it. And at the same time, there was this thing at Brock, this kickstarting entrepreneurship program, which was like, here's how you can start your own business. And we're like, let's apply to that. And if we get into that, we can actually make this a real thing. And then we got into it and then did that and our 4th year capstone project at university at the same time. And then as soon as we graduated, like 3 or 4 weeks later, launched the studio and just kept going.
So yeah, that's a lot of people that I've talked to, especially people that are like just finishing school. That's kind of the dream, right? Like that's why I think we have such a big like budding industry in Ontario. Is there are a lot of great schools that people are meeting at, and that people are creating all these small indie studios. So I actually we'll get right into it, just because you led with that. Is mobile games with no ads, no microtransactions, and no of the things that will remain nameless. Why was this such an important cornerstone for your company? Because now that you've done that, right, like that's such an important part of your identity that you won't be able to, at least without backlash, be able to kind of change that down the road when you are looking to maybe grow as a business. So I'm curious of why that was such like an important thing. Agusia, why don't we start with you?
So I like one of the biggest things was when we were applying for the Kickstarter entrepreneurship program, they're like, you need to have something different to be successful. You can't just copy and paste. Like, we can't just make a studio. And then we all were like, we kind of hate this design, and it'd be great to play like a PC quality game or like a console quality game on my phone when I'm like on the bus waiting to get somewhere. So that was really the main motivation. And like the fact that if we do it well enough, we might be able to show that it can be done and other people would do it, and like actually break that stigma of making like mobile games very microtransaction heavy. So that's my opinion. I don't know if Adam has anything more on top of that.
Please.
I mean, on my side, it was, I maybe didn't even realize it at the time, and it sort of developed since then, but there's almost like an element of trust to it when like you're playing, let's say like a big, like AAA narrative heavy game, like I don't know, like The Last of Us or like an Elden Ring or something. There's like an expectation from the developer to the consumer that like they're selling you on, you're going to enjoy this experience, you're going to get to like play your character, enjoy the mechanics, get into the narrative, whatever. But when it's a game more geared towards like those microtransactions, and things like that, there's not necessarily the same expectation. Like the game isn't necessarily trying to sell you enjoyment. It's trying to do that, but it's also trying to manipulate you as heavily as possible, like into those transactions. So like I've been playing this game on my phone, Fishdom to name it. It's a match 3 game, and it's purported itself as being like no ads. All right, and I'm like, that's pretty cool. That's kind of like what we do, and I've been playing it. And every once in a while, it does have microtransactions. I'll be playing the game, and the thought will just cross my mind, like, I didn't beat that level. And did I not beat that level because I wasn't good enough to beat it? Or did I not beat that level because they decided that I was on too much of a streak without using any of the premium currency, that I shouldn't beat a level because then I might purchase premium currency?
It's a gross feeling.
And it's gross. And I'm like, I don't really want to play this game anymore because I can't trust if the experience I'm getting isn't specifically trying to push me towards spending money in the microtransactions there.
So for something like that, like we'll get much more into Hotel Hermes in a bit, but there was something I wanted to ask you guys was, so no microtransactions, but let's say the next game that you do, you have cosmetics. Is that something that you would be open to doing for microtransactions? Because those are the only ones I think in games that don't necessarily feel gross to me, right? Is when people are on fire and like all these crazy things. I'm like, oh, you want to pay $20 for that? Like all you, because it's not pay to win, right? So yeah. I'm just curious of like what your philosophy is with something like that. Is it like hard stop, or is it something that like maybe we'll revisit down the road?
I don't think it's anything we're opposed to stuff like that. If it's like cosmetic only, I know like especially in games that have like a live ops development cycle where there's like seasons and things like that, it's impossible to keep your studio afloat on a release cycle like that if there's just a one-time purchase up front, right? So like cosmetics kind of need to exist to keep those games afloat. So we don't really have anything against them. I don't know if we'd ever make a game that is that sort of like long longevity life. But if we do, like that's a possible avenue to explore that we wouldn't be against per se.
Cool. I'm just curious because I love that it's like, it's in your slogan. It's one of the main things on your site. Like it's clearly was so important to the two of you that like it's showcased everywhere. So like I love that you've like kind of stuck to that and been like, this is what we're built off of. This is like our foundation. which feels good because like I've never been a big mobile person at all. There's a couple that I've dabbled in, but that's honestly the main reason is that every time I turn it on, it's like you get your dailies, you get your weeklies. I'm like, I don't like that. That's not why I play games. Sometimes it feels good. Like I play a lot of Destiny 2. Feels like I'll go in, do some strikes, do this and that to kind of do my weeklies. But on mobile, I love being able to open up a game, play a couple chapters of something, play a couple levels of something, and then not feel like I have to invest money to get the most out of it. I want to get everything that the developers wanted me to get, and not and like you said, knowing that it's not behind a paywall, that it's like clearly this is where they wanted you to start paying for things. There's a huge difficulty spike.
Yeah.
That's something I definitely wanted to bring up. You made it such like an integral part, right? Which I just love that. I just had to reiterate that. So one thing I did want to get into was Hotel Hermes. Before we actually get into the conversation about it, can you just tell me where did that idea come from in the first place?
So whenever we're coming up for ideas for our new games, what we do is like, if we're wrapping up a project, we're like every day post like 2 ideas. We have like a Discord channel for it, just like post 2 ideas in there, and they're pretty bad. They're rough. they're like one-liners that are like just like the most absurd things.
Souls, Animal Crossing, perfect. Let's do it.
Yeah, just stuff
exactly.
Like that.
We got the idea from actually Dave Evans. He runs Falling Squirrel. He was one of our instructors, and he was in film before. And he, like his producer or whatever, made him do this like 5 ideas a day. And we're like, we're adapting that rule, and instead, because there's 2 of us, we'll do 2 ideas, and we'll only do it when we have a game project closing. So that's where we got it from.
I had no idea that you guys knew Dave. Dave's a friend of the show. His wife Erica was actually on episode 3. Yep. She's one of my favorite people in the world. Phantom Compass, shout out.
I work for Phantom Compass, so
we're gonna get to that. My partner works there now, so that's the studio that I'm very, very close with. But yeah, that's awesome. I love Dave. But yeah, so like you said, like you throw in a couple of ideas and then none of them really popped out to you, at least for
so then like once we're done and we need to pick an idea, we'll go through the list and we'll each like pick our 5 favorite ones, and then we'll look at them and we'll flesh them out so that they're more than just like a single sentence, to like actual like ideas and pitches, and then we'll write those up into like little like executive summaries, like 1 or 2 page documents that are like, here's what the game might look like. And then we usually we show that around to like some other people we know in the industry and like friends and families, be like, which ones do you like? And then depending on that feedback, we just like pick one of them and we're like, we're going to do this one now. And that's how Hotel Hermes came about.
I think even something as simple as that is a lesson I think a lot of people should take, is that it's a 2-person studio, but that's not where that's not where the walls have to be. You have all these other people in the industry that you can show things to and be like, what do you think? And like getting feedback. So you ended up locking in on that idea of this puzzle like mobile game that has a banging soundtrack, first of all. That was just the first thing I noticed. I was like, this bass, like, wow, like it really like I can feel the back of my phone vibrating. This is awesome. So why was that something that you decided to actually go with and build out to that extent? Because I got through the tutorial and then it opened up completely. I just saw this whole list of people I hadn't met and all these things I get to do, and I was like, this is much deeper than I was expecting it to be, because I guess I'm just jaded of mobile games, right? Mm-hmm. So why was it something that you decided to really put that much effort and focus in?
So the ideas we like kind of come in 2 forms. One, I'm a narrative guy, like storytelling, like my games need to have stories in them. So it's got to have a story. And then 2, it needs something for Agusia to do. So it has to have like a complex programming aspect to it.
Definitely, yeah.
So like a sort of narrative based puzzle game sort of landed like just in the perfect center of both of those areas for us. So it had a story that I could sink my teeth into, and as well as systems and things that Agusia can work on. And at the time, like we were coming off of our first majorly overscoped first game. So we were like, we want something small, like one main core system that we can focus on. And it's like, you're in one room, you're just delivering mail, that's it. And we're like, this is like the perfect second step for us, where we're not going to crazy overscope it.
That actually answers one of my future questions, where I was going to talk about that and say, like, a lot of studios, like with their second or third game, a lot of smaller studios either have the same point of view or the same genre. Like, we went to two completely different areas, and I was curious as to why, and that makes sense because it does, like, 2D exploration game, right? Like, I feel like it's just going to keep expanding. That I'm glad you guys really focused in on, and that ended up being the one that was nominated for the Canadian Game Awards. What was that experience like? Agusia, why don't we start with you?
So we've gotten, like, there's a lot of fake awards out there where you can get like an email asking you to send some keys and potentially get an award, and then you have to pay for the actual awards. So we've gotten those before. So when we got the email, we're like, oh, it's probably one of those. And we're actually in the Discord server with a bunch of other Niagara game devs. It's just like where we just talk about problems and stuff. And one of the people there were like, congrats on your nomination. And then I'm like, Adam, that wasn't a fake award. We actually got nominated. So that was my reaction. And it took me so long to believe. And we were actually at like the IO, or not IO, but Ontario Creates for our next game meeting for like the funding that we got approved for. And they're like, tell us about yourself. And she's like, oh, you forgot something. We're like, what did we forget? And she was mentioning the Canadian Game Awards like nomination. We're like, oh, yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah, you were nominated on a national scale. Like, it's like the biggest award show that Canada has. That's awesome. Yeah. I love that you both forgot. That's great. Yeah. Truly humble. It's like, oh yeah, just no big deal. Like, pretty impressive, especially with your second game. Like, that's nothing to. You're like nominated up there with like Happy and like other studios that have been at it for a long time. Like, that must have been a very cool feeling.
It certainly surprised us.
Yeah.
Didn't surprise me. But yeah, that was one of the things I definitely needed to ask, because I kind of got that vibe, right? There was like a couple people that I had talked to that have been like, it was a big deal to them, but they also weren't sure. Right, like I had some people that same kind of thing where I know there's a bunch of awards where it's kind of pay, like, oh, you get an award. It's like, no, this is a big deal. This is a legit big deal, and I love that how you get it like reminded and like shown to you and be like, no, this is important. Like, so I did want to talk a little bit about the Fisherman in the Sea. So this was your first game. Was this something that you came together and started making in school? Was this part of a school project where like a lot of these smaller indie studios tend to start with? Where did this idea come from, and how did it get so overscoped so quickly?
So it wasn't building off of anything we'd done before. We were in like the same capstone team at Brock, but the pandemic kind of put a whole kibosh on kind of taking that outside of the university. We just kind of like, pandemic hit, nobody knew what was going on. You graduate, congrats. And then silence. So
we're still waiting on our our convocation ceremony.
We're getting in fall.
Supposedly.
We're finally graduating.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It was what, 2020 for both of you, right?
Yes.
Was it April?
Well,
yes.
It would have been in June, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good luck. Yeah. I'm glad you're finally getting your dues.
So we started Fisherman, kind of the same process, a little less refined with the first idea. We were just like throwing things at the wall and seeing what stuck. And we were like kind of settling on like 3 ideas. And we're like, why would we just pick one of them? What if we like put all 3 of them together and made a game? And that's where the problem started. And we're like, yeah, so there's going to be like this overworld sailing where you're getting like shot up by pirates. And then there's going to be like this whole fishing mini game where you can like upgrade your fishing line and all these different things. And then like quests and like ancient temples you can explore Zelda style and all of this stuff. And we were young and naive and like, yeah, we can do all of this. It'll be perfectly fine. Even though it was like 3 people and we had never done mobile games before. We had never done like 2D pixel art style before. We had never run our... No.
Yeah.
For me, that's the biggest surprise, because like the games clearly have like a strong visual identity. So the fact that that's something that you've never dabbled in before is wildly impressive.
Yeah.
And
we
fishing
did-
is just my thing.
Yeah,
I love that.
we did contract the art for Fisherman and the Sea from like some Brock students, and
wow.
then for Hotel Hermes, Adam did most of it, and I think we had an intern from Brock help out, so that we were like, if you beat Hotel Hermes at the end, you get a cutscene where it goes through the whole hotel, and he did like a bunch of animations for each of the characters.
Wow. Spoiler alert.
I mean, now everyone has to go play the end of the game.
Oh, that's awesome though. Like I had no idea that was all like your first time doing something like that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And-
you just spoke to me with for some reason it's like my thing in games. Like I don't fish in real life, but you give me a fishing mini game, like I will spend hours. Like
I'm the same way. Yeah.
I think Ocarina of Time kind of drilled that into our brains.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
That's where it all started. One thing too that I did notice is adjective noun tools, your scriptable properties. Can you explain a little bit of that to our audience? Agusia, why don't we start with you? Because I feel like
Okay.
this is your domain right now.
So one of the things that Unity offers is like the asset store, and because like Adam's mainly a designer, I'm mainly a programmer, and because I was working like full time for Phantom Compass and other studios, I didn't design tools to I didn't program our games to be like program specific. I made them generic so that Adam could implement like 90% of it. So I code a tiny bit. He then designs everything. So like all of the quests in Fisherman and the Sea, they're all like logically designed through Adam, where I only wrote like whatever amount of lines of code and then it was done, and I just gave it to him and he just like actually sets up the logic. So like you have to give a fish to someone, and he added like this check to compare if that's the proper fish and stuff like that. So with that, I was like, we could probably sell these things. So Scriptable Properties is like a way to use the editor in Unity without programming to create some basic logic. So you can make like a bool and it'll tell you if it's true or false. And it's just like programming without actually programming.
Wow, that's very cool. I've never seen that, at least from like any studios of like this level. Like I've never seen something, and I love that. I made sure I saw that on your site, and I was like, I need to question about this because I'm not a dev in any way, shape, or form, and I never will claim to be. But that's something that I found really interesting. Is there was like you're helping people with some of the tools that you're using.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Adam, do you have anything to add?
I don't think so. No, like the scriptable properties thing is very much like we were using it in house, and like I was primarily using it as like a replacement for like heavy loads of code, and then we were both just like, this might be something other people are interested in. And it's kind of picked up in not really like other development studios that like have programmers to do these things for them, but like we had like a professor from like Columbia be like, I'm using this to teach like first year math students like simple like logic in like without having to teach them programming. Like they can just use these like very simple logic gates that you have in here to like do kind of like basic programming operations without actually doing programming. And we were like, that's kind of neat. Cool.
That's a huge deal. Like that's very cool. Like, did you expect something like that? The fact that it's actually being used to teach like the quote unquote next generation?
No, not at all.
Wow, that's awesome. Love that. That's really cool. You did speak a little bit about the whole Niagara region, right? Like that's something that I try to bring up in every podcast, especially the fact that this is for Ontario, that it keeps coming back to like Niagara and London. Because every time people talk about the industry in Ontario, it's always Toronto. Toronto. Yeah. There's AAAs, there's big studios, small studios. But most of the people we've had on, and most of the people that I've had the pleasure of speaking to, are from the Niagara or London region. What do you think makes Niagara such a hotbed for it? Do you think it's just because of the schooling, or do you think there's a lot more to it?
Agusia, if you want to start, you've worked with most of them, so.
That's just one of the things I didn't want to bring up during this conversation is you kind of ran the gambit. Yeah.
So I think the college and university help because there's also the Niagara College that has the game dev program as well, which the Brock joint program also, like, we were taking Niagara College courses and Brock courses at the same time. So the programs do help, but it's I think the biggest reason why it's like the Niagara region has so many developers is because of Silicon Knights existing. And then when they got when that disaster happened, they got like shut down and everything. A bunch of people just started up their own companies and like locally. And then there's the incubator Innovate Niagara, and they have a huge tech field. And like before the pandemic, we used to show up like quarterly in the every couple of months to tech mashups and just see the devs and actually talk to them. And like the community is so engaged in Niagara, and like we help each other out. So like I had an internship at Pixelnauts when I was in my third year, and then afterwards Erica Evans reached out to me to work at Phantom Compass, and I'm like, yes, but I'm also planning to start my own company. And she's like, okay, just have it in, like, have you legally on your company before you start, and then we're good. So like we ended up having to make sure we like got our incorporation done before I started my first day at Phantom Compass, which really helped like get the deadline in. And then like it was kind of an interesting April because we had the pandemic hit and we were starting the company, and then I was starting in May at Phantom Compass. So I was like, we need this done now. We need to find a lawyer, and like hopefully they'll talk to us.
That's a whirlwind of a couple of months.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like that's not an easy thing to do, right? And like that must take a lot of courage to be able to just open up a studio and finding full-time jobs and the plague.
Yep.
Like, that's a crazy couple of months. It looks like it paid off.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the fact that I saw Pixelnauts and I saw Phantom Compass and A Game, and I was like,
yeah.
I feel like you two are very like ingrained in the Niagara culture.
Yeah.
So like
A Game is a Toronto studio.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
I spoke. But yeah, like Phantom Compass and Pixelnauts, right? Being like especially so close with IO and things like that, like on some of our committees and things like that, that like those two obviously stuck out to me, and I was like, as if you're both like work there and you were able to actually be that like committed with the community itself. Have you found that you've been able to contribute in a different way than you used to? Like when you first joined that community, when you were like going to school, you were learning a lot. Do you feel now that you're kind of able to help a little bit more, maybe teach a little bit?
Adam, you can go first.
Okay. So like the community has been amazing. Like we're in like a Discord with the other Niagara devs, and like any question that anyone has, like you can just throw it in there, and like everyone helps each other out. It's a very like cooperative experience. We're all in the same field. We're all like technically competitors with each other, but it doesn't feel that way at all. Like everyone's just kind of rooting for each other's success. And we're kind of at the spot where like we've gotten enough off the ground that we can kind of start to contribute to those conversations a little bit more. It was very much like we're the new kids on the block, and we are still, but we're off the ground enough that like we have a solid foothold where we can start like engaging with other studios in like a more collaborative way, and not just like, hey, I've never done this thing before, how do you do it, sort of deal.
Yeah. I know that makes perfect sense, because you have that experience instead of being like, oh, I learned this in school. It's like, oh, we just dealt with that. We just dealt with this programming problem on our current game, but let me help you out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then another contribution that I was able to do was I actually taught a programming class at the university. It was an
less than a year?
Yeah.
I saw that and I was like, I need to question about this.
So it was I taught part-time in like one course, which was like a fundamentals Unity class, because the instructor who usually taught it could not take it because it was like an evening class and it was online. So I showed up and I'm like, hi, I'm a graduate of the program. I'm here to teach you programming. And it was like the students that were in it aren't like computer science students. They're in the interactive arts and science program and game students, like the design specifically. So most of them did not want to program. And I was there teaching them how to program and use Unity. So it was a good experience. And like, it's nice to share my knowledge back to them. But there's huge moments of like imposter syndrome where like I was like, I feel like I shouldn't be teaching these kids this, but I guess I have the experience because I've done so much, like working at learning from other studios, learning from our own mistakes at our studio. So yeah.
Do you feel like that runs rampant with both of you? I know it does for me personally, but like that imposter syndrome feeling, even though you do have 2 games under your belt, you've been in the industry for years, even before finishing school, right? Like that's not when your career started. Your career started years ago. Like Agusia, I know you've been programming since like what, 2013?
Yeah.
So it's like, is that something that you feel like is slowly starting to slip away and you're finding yourselves as like an industry and as a studio? Or do you think that's something that'll just always stick around because we all have that for some reason? It runs rampant in the gaming industry, so I'm just curious with the two.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll ever go away. Like there's some days where like I'm like running things and everything's going fine. And then I'll be like, I'm like 25 years old and I'm like other people's bosses. And that doesn't feel right to me. It's like, how am I qualified to do this? And like, kind of just like questioning like what is going on. And like, if I have the necessary skills to like, I'd keep this company afloat and like keep people's jobs like going. And then other days it's like, I don't think about it and everything's fine. Everything's running smoothly and it just kind of comes and goes and you just get hit with it occasionally. And I think that's probably something that's always just going to be there. And it's just like when it does hit you to like remind yourself and just be like, I've done these things. Like I've probably done this specific thing that I'm about to do before and just kind of like talk yourself back from it as best that you can. But it's definitely something like, and talking about it helps, especially because like everyone has experienced it in the games industry in some way or another.
Agusia, what about you? How do you feel about it?
I think it's just gonna get worse. Like every time like something major happens, I'm like, no, this can't be it. Like I'm in denial about it 90% of the time, and then the other 10% of the time, I just go, like I don't view it as that big of a picture. Like with the Canadian Awards nomination, with like I was actually like a finalist for Women in Business in Niagara region for 2021. Like I the whole time I'm like in disbelief that these things exist.
I think the one thing I do really like about the industry, or one of the things I really like about the industry, is that so many people feel that way. They can be in the industry for 20 years, 30 years, and it's still, I think it's a respect for your colleagues, and it's because you know how hard it is. Like you've done it now, so you even have more respect, so you even feel like they're higher than they were before you really knew what they were experiencing. But I don't know if that speaks necessarily to like the industry itself and us, or like the industry itself still trying to fight for like relevance, even though it's the biggest media industry in the world, right? That it's like, I work in video games, and like the fact that you still have to explain that to such a big percentage of the population, I think might like be part of why we have that syndrome, where it's like, if society doesn't think that it's a big deal, like, do I belong in it? Like, I'm obviously not explaining it the greatest, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're still fighting for relevance, which is just absurd to me of how big the industry is. The fact that you can actually like look at numbers, and it's not, oh, it's the cultural, it's the art. It's like, no, like numbers. Like if you understand money, you understand the video game industry and how big of a deal it is. That's great. I do like talking about some of that stuff on this show, because I think we all kind of feel like that. And the only way that it's going to get better for any of us is if you see like your colleagues and your peers talking about them, because they're not easy, right? It's nothing easy for any of us to do. Even the good. And the fact that nomination is what probably is going to make you feel like that more and be like, oh, I don't belong here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So on a lighter note, one thing I did want to ask Adam, I wanted to ask you, is you are a big part of the writing, right, when it comes to Adjective Noun. You're also a huge person into Dungeons and Dragons. I just started. That's something that we won't talk too much about, but it's something that I'm currently very, very excited about. I got the 5e rulebook right back there. Do you think that writing those stories and creating those worlds has directly helped you when it comes to writing and creating these these worlds for your games?
100%. Like, no doubt about it. It is probably the thing that has helped me the most, and not just like the writing it, but like making fun game mechanics, and to an extent, like running a business. Like DMing has helped me with like all of that, which is kind of like everything you could hope for from a hobby.
That you're actually getting like real world and real life experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agusia, do you play at all?
I do. I'm actually in a couple of Adam's games.
Is that something that you two like? Is it fun for you to be able to do that kind of outside of work and be able to play those characters and those personalities, or do you find that it's like we spend too much time together as it is?
I think it's good. It's a good, like, it's not work, but like we can still hang out and do other things together, sort of deal.
It does help that there's other people there, because it's not just the two of us sharing the experience. It is the whole party that gets to experience it with us.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think that like for the pandemic, I think D&D has actually held a lot of groups together and friends together, because it's like that, like right now currently that's like my one social obligation a week, and it's great. That's like, it's a time that you know you're going to get to see people and you can live in a world that isn't this one.
Yeah, I think for sure, like having like D&D in whatever form you could experience it in during the pandemic helped a lot of people get through it, for sure. Because it's like a social obligation that isn't having to do with the real world. Like, you're not talking about the pandemic, you're not talking about any other social stress. It's something completely different. And it's not like completely an escape, because you're not just like by yourself, like playing a video game per se, where like you're escaping into that world. Like, you're escaping with other people, which I think is like a much more profound like form of healing, really.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. That's something that I really try to push on people now, is that experience in like those type of like tabletop games. Obviously this is much more of a video game and IDM podcast, but that's something that I really wanted to start pushing at people, because I had always wanted to jump in and I never did for years and years. And then I got invited into, like, one of my best friends, he's a DM, and he invited me into their session, and it's been transformative, right? Especially like I think mental health, it's a huge thing, especially right now, that I think that it's been very beneficial for a lot of us to kind of have that time, you're right, with friends, rather than just your generic escapism by yourself playing a certain game or VR or however you do it. That I think D&D. Why was it important with the fisherman to have the unique skills? Like, why was that an important thing? I just want to throw a curveball at you. Why was that something that you were like, you know what, this is something that I'm going to put hours and hours and hours of my life into?
Like the variety of different things you can do in the game.
Yeah.
It kind of came down to when we were initially making it, it kind of felt empty. And I think we may have not taken the best approach on it, but you were kind of just like going from task to task, basically kind of doing like fetch quests. And we felt like it needed something more. And then we were kind of like adding in these little elements to just like spice up when you're moving around the overworld, or like spice up when you're fishing. Like, you can do more than just like drop the line. And I think maybe not the best approach. I think we could have narrowed down and made what we already had as an existing thing kind of more engaging and interactive in the core of what Fisherman in the Sea was, which was kind of like you were just going from island to island helping people, and like that was kind of the main draw. And it kind of morphed out more because we were fresh on the scene, and we were like, we're gonna make this amazing thing, and then it kind of got spread way too thin. So I think kind of like a sense of needing to have more in the game to make it feel like a more complete experience kind of backfired, and some of those systems are like just there so that there's something there. Like, pirates shoot at you in the overworld because we felt like sailing around by yourself wasn't the best thing, and I think making sailing by yourself a better experience would have been the better approach than adding something in to nullify it.
That's a good way to look at it, though. There's so many lessons that you must have learned from that first game, right? That's going to go into the next one.
Oh yeah.
So you've already explained why it was so important that you made a studio based on, no microtransactions and something, a pure experience. But why solely mobile? Like, why has that been such an integral part? Why not game for Steam, or why not, an RPG? Like, why not like kind of leave it more open ended? Why were you committed to like we make mobile games?
I think part of it is that like the mobile experience is that thing that is impacted most heavily by like the microtransactions and the ads, and it's kind of seemed like a lesser form of gaming, even though it is the majority of gaming. It's like 70% of all of the money that goes through the gaming industry is from mobile games.
Absolutely right.
So like a console gamer is less of a gamer than a mobile gamer if you're looking at it in terms of just like the percentage of total gamers, which sounds completely wrong, right? When that's not what people think of, right? Like if you play a mobile game,
right?
Yeah, if you play a mobile game, you're not a real gamer, right? But it's almost like we don't want that to be the case, right? We want, if you're playing a mobile game, that doesn't mean that it has to be like a lesser form of media, right? And like there's a lot of really good indie mobile games out there that are like specifically like very personal experiences. There's one called like, I forget the name. I think it's called like One Lost Phone or something. And it's like, it is the idea that when you open the game, it's a lock screen and you basically like hack into this phone and you find like all of these old text messages and like pictures and things. And you're like walking through like this very personal, intimate conversation because it's on your phone, which is like the most intimate thing for most people. And that's not a game that would work nearly as well on a computer. Like it has to be a mobile game.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I did play a game that was a stick in or a USB stick in the grass, which was a similar concept, a PC game, where it was a USB key, and like the execution of it was not as great because it was just you like loading up the files and trying to read them, but didn't have that like personal feeling to it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Adam. Like you were just saying there, like with it having to be on your phone, because that's just like such an innate thing to all of us, like how personal that must be. But that was something that was like obviously so important the whole way through when it came to you about making a studio. Agusia, have you ever wanted to go in a different direction? Are you like, oh, let's keep making mobile games, we think we were really like getting our flow here? Or you thought of like, let's maybe expand onto a different platform?
So for me, the mobile games were a good constraint. We're only focusing on two platforms, Android and iOS, so it was a lot easier to handle. We are considering, because like we hope that when people actually, like if we were to release on Steam and people were to play our game, like if we rebinded the controls so that they were like controller friendly and like more mouse friendly, then we would hope that people won't be like, oh, this is a mobile game port, as like people's innate reaction to it. They like, when you play a game that has like very like once you get hit by microtransactions, you're like, oh, this is a mobile game port, or like the like UI and the constraints are like designed for a mobile platform with just touch input. You can tell. So we are like, if we were to port our games over, we'd make sure to fix those. But I do like the mobile platform because it's a place where not a lot of people want to venture into, with specifically like non-microtransaction free. So there's a huge market out there for us to hit. And that's why we're making very different games, so that we can get, like, if we make a game in every genre, we're going to make everyone happy eventually, right?
That's a good way to look at it. That makes a lot of sense. I do like that both of you are very focused on keeping things realistic in scope, constrained, right? Like obviously you want to dream and you want to do more and you want to do like bigger and bigger things. Well, that happens to a lot of like smaller studios, which you've learned very, very quickly with The Fisherman in the Sea, where it's like, let's not blow this out of proportion. Let's make smaller, like you're building those tools, right? So then the next game, you're not completely starting from scratch. You're kind of implementing. And that's what mobile is, right? You're kind of able to turn games out a little bit faster. rather than have, you know, a 4-year dev cycle? Like, do you think with mobile that like both of your, you know, a year, 2 years makes more sense? Was that also part of the idea?
Yeah, at least like we're like so we worked on capstones and we had 8 months to design a game. We did two, one through Niagara College and then one through Brock University while we're in school, and it was 8 months, and we're like, these games every time were over scoped, and these were the problems, and like we're like we could do it better on mobile, and then Fisherman in the Sea came out, and we're like, we made the exact same mistakes as we did for our capstones. But then after with Hotel Hermes, like we're like, we had this one concept, one room, like one basic mechanic, and it was set, and it worked out really well.
But you put a lot of time into making sure that it felt tactile. I think that's my biggest thing when it comes to mobile games, right? Is like, my dream has always been to have like Pokemon on my phone, because that would just be, like, all Pokemon, that'd be just perfect. Because like a D-pad is one thing, but like analog sticks, even a lot of swipe controls, they feel very clumsy to me. But that was one thing with Hotel Hermes that like I was, as soon as I opened it, I was like pulling those, like in the tutorial, pulling those 4 things. I was like, I wonder if I'm going to grab the wrong one, or like a lot of things like the hitboxes are off. But clearly you spend a lot of time and like meticulousness of going through and making sure that everything's going to be accurate, because then it feels a lot better, and it feels like, okay, this was meant to be on a phone. This was clearly designed from the ground up to be felt, right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate it. Who made the music? I brought it up at the very beginning, but I never got an answer.
Shout out to Young Pinap on SoundCloud. He was in the program with us. He is amazing musician, sound designer, composer, and one of the big things that we like doing is that like we're in a position where like we have a studio and we know people like who graduated with us or graduated like a year or two under us, who like we know their talent, we've worked with them in the past, we've seen their stuff through like their entire growth in school, and if we know someone like that, we usually like go to them first and be like, hey, we're doing this thing, like, do you want to work with us on it, and things like that. And he did the music for Fisherman in the Sea as well. He did the music for Hotel Hermes. We're working with him on our next project as well, and he's like our not in-house but like go-to composer for all of our music needs.
I love that, because like we were all saying before, is like your scope doesn't need to be, or sorry, like your walls don't need to be like just the two of you, right? It's like not one of you needs to make it, or you need to do this crazy licensing deal or something like that. It's like, no, people, you go to school and you get into the industry, especially a place like Niagara, like, you know, someone that's talented enough, get them in, and then that kind of helps them grow. The future of Adjective Noun Studio. So with a renowned game such as Hotel Hermes, right, and getting that nomination, it kind of sets you up for the next big thing. Because now you're out on iOS, right, and you had already had an Android. So what does the future look like for you with things that you're able to talk about?
Yeah. We've been very busy. We released Hotel Hermes, and then there was a little lull. We were like fixing things up, releasing some bug patches and stuff. And then like the new year hit, and we just flew off the walls of being busy. We do have another project in the works that we can say like we've gotten funding for it. It's going ahead. Which what I can say about that is like it's a point and click detective noir game in like a fantasy metropolis. So like 1920s New York, but like goblins and orcs,
check
elves.
My entire list. Perfect.
Yeah. So like we started production on that, and then we had sort of talked about and dabbled in like doing service work for other companies, and then like we picked up a few contracts there, and then like we picked up like a solid contract that has like kind of changed everything for us, because like now we have like money to expand out, to hire new people, and like slowly grow out the studio with like more talent. And that has kind of opened up a lot of doors for us in terms of where we can go next. So like, it's kind of funny because like for like Fisherman, I was primarily doing like story and like narrative and like implementation and engine, and then Hotel Hermes I kind of did like all the art and all the narrative stuff. And like now that we've grown a little bit larger and we're working on more things, I have entire days where I don't touch a single game dev related thing. It's just like production meetings and like reading and writing contracts and doing budgets and going to the bank. And it's just like, it's a very different experience what I'm doing now than what I was doing like 5 months ago, which is just kind of how fast things are moving, which I don't think is entirely uncommon for the industry. Eventually you get big enough, you hire someone who can do the production things so you can get back to doing the game things. But that's sort of the future. So we're working on our next big title to be released.
Congratulations to both of you on all
Thank
of
you.
that wonderful news. Is there anything that you want, final words, anything that you want to say to the audience, any words of advice for people that are looking to get into the industry, whether fresh out of school or, looking for a career change?
If you're looking to get into this industry, email people in the industry, and they're more than likely to be like, cool, good for you. Here's some advice. Or just like look for, now that in-person things are back in some places, show up to a tech mashup or something similar, like a gathering that's open to the public, and just talk with people. And of course, like it's easier if you're like an artist to like send a portfolio and be like, hey, look at these things I'm doing. But also like game jams are a huge thing, and they're easy, low bar of entry. You can just show up and be like, I've never touched a computer before, but I'd like to learn. And they'll be like, great, get on my team. So those would be my advice to, if you're looking to get started in the industry.
What about you?
Adam covered most of it. Networking is huge. You never know what you get out of a networking experience. Like, you may think you'd get a client or like someone you could talk to about certain problems. It's kind of crazy, like what you can get from like just talking to someone random. And like you could get a sale, you could get someone potentially doing work for you on a certain thing. And it's like good to get to know people, because you could also just help them out. And then game jams are really good. Like, even if you like, it's just one weekend, you may be burnt out afterwards because you're going to be working up. Like, I did the global game jam with Adam and a bunch of our friends from like that graduated with us, and I was working 2 jobs at the time, and then I was like, game jam, and I was like, okay, I didn't get a weekend. I was working like 120 hours around the game jam, but the game jam pumped me up, and like it was like, we've done so much 2D programming that like working in a 3D space, because we actually made like a PC 3D game, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot about like the Z-axis existing in code. Like, I made so many errors, but it was a good break.
Yeah, must it like kind of like re-energize you like creatively, right? It was doing something like completely different and being like, no, this is why we do this. This is why we stick with 2D, because we don't need to worry about all of this other nonsense.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I want to thank both of you for joining me today on the Lodgge podcast, episode 8. This is our season 1 finale. Hopefully we tied up some of those loose ends in this wonderful anime arc of ours. So yeah, thank you both. I really appreciate it. Adjective Noun. Check out Hotel Hermes and everything that they have coming next. And everybody, take care.